Hi, Kevin. Welcome. Last month or 2 months ago, you were in the Netherlands to give a presentation about learning ecosystems and about out-of-school learning. And we realized that many people couldn't attend the presentations because they were filled up. So this idea from several persons was, let's make a short video about it, and let's see if we can give the key messages that you gave in your presentations, that we can share them also with the Dutch library field. Um, so to start off, um, can you start with telling something about yourself, about the work that you do and that you did?
Sure. Well, thank you, Yuri. I'm pleased to be back talking to you again. I am a professor at the University of Pittsburgh, and I study informal learning, which is the kind of learning that takes place out of classrooms and out of school settings. And over the course of my work, I've become really interested in the role, particularly that cultural institutions such as libraries or museums have in finding and connecting with people's interests and supporting learning pathways as people go about their lives. And, it's a lot of learning opportunities happen outside of classroom settings for children and people who are school age. But of course, we all keep learning throughout our lives as well. And here, in the States at least, I find I'm often needing to remind people that schools are not equal to the word education. Education is a broader, community engaged, and lifelong pursuit. So that's really what I think my work has been pointing towards is how do you think about learning if you're not going to use the language and the logics of schooling?
Yeah, yeah. Then that fits also with what we talked about earlier. You make a big point about life-wide learning,
Yeah.
and that's of course something that as libraries we also recognize that it's something that you learn at every opportunity in every place with all the people around you. But so why is this notion of life-wide learning so important?
I think it's important because it really centers the individual in how we think about learning and how we think about providing educational services. So, lifelong learning just refers to the fact that people are, as they go through the world, bumping in to topics and opportunities and people, and they're discovering what they're interested in. They're discovering what they want to know more about. They're discovering about their place in the world. And as you go through all the different stages of your life, and as you are in community with all the different people that you're going to learn with, it's up to the individual to kind of make sense of and draw connections between all of those points in their lives. And it leads to a bunch of diverse outcomes. If we think about education as really centered only in schools, that's a process that begins anew every year. It has clear outcomes. It kind of sorts people in predictable ways. But if you pull back and think more about how people come to understand what they're interested in, how they seek out resources at places like libraries, it's a really diverse, unpredictable set of pathways. People bump into things. People are serendipity involved. There's accidents that happen that are really important. So they're bumping into people all around them and discovering what they're interested in. And they're discovering how to follow up on their interests and engage with the things they're passionate about throughout their life. And in doing that process lifelong and also life-wide, which means they're not just learning in the library or in school or on a computer, but they're putting together multiple sources of input, multiple kinds of experiences to make sense of who they are and how other people see them, which is their identity. So I think the idea of lifelong and life-wide learning is just a really important reminder for people like us who are interested in the nonprofit sector or the community engaged sector, that we need to look at and follow the interests of our participants. We need to be listening to what they want and how they learn. And we need to be turning outwards beyond the walls of our institutions and engaging with community, because that's really how we can be there to provide ongoing support for people as they're learning.
So in your presentations, you always have this image about the almost a percentage about formal and informal learning through your life. And it's always shocks people to realize that even as a kid, when you are the most involved in informal learning, it's still only like 18% of your waking time. So are you saying that we as libraries, but also as museums and other, on the more informal side, that we have the opportunity to connect all these informal pathways?
So I love that image. I sometimes call it the deep blue sea that surrounds the time you spend in formal settings. And it's a challenge, I think, for places like libraries and museums to figure out what is their role in supporting those informal learning experiences, because people come with all sorts of interests, they come with all sorts of purposes to our settings. And we need to be there and be listening and responsive to provide resources to help them along in their learning journeys. And the way we think about success in those settings, sometimes we're pressured to think about it in school-like ways. Did someone learn today? Did someone over a 6-week summer program, become someone who knows a lot about robotics? But the outcomes that are most important from the work we do outside of schools are really questions like, did someone develop an interest? Did someone learn how to engage in a complex task? And is someone developing motivation to pursue an identity as someone who loves things like art or science or nature or history? And so those outcomes are what we are kind of built to deliver in a way that schools often struggle to motivate students.
I don't know if you mentioned the word learning ecosystem, but this is actually what we're talking about.
Yes.
As you know, because I translated it for you earlier, we have the network agenda in the Netherlands for the library sector, and we're actually saying what's the kind of role in for a library in a local learning ecosystem. And a learning ecosystem is like a strong connected local network in which, if it thrives, schools, municipalities, libraries, museums, social services, sport clubs, they all collaborate to give learners the chance to keep developing in their own learning paths. And in the presentations that you gave in the Netherlands, you gave a few examples. The one that I think was very nice and very interesting for the library sector was the one about reading and young kids, I think in Pittsburgh, was it? Or in Pennsylvania?
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Philadelphia. Sorry, I mean Philadelphia. So can you tell a little bit about that example?
Sure. First, I want to say I think the network agenda is really exciting, and I haven't seen many efforts like it around the world, because the hardest part of the ecosystem work, and you've described your definition of ecosystem, is how to conceptualize the way that we collaborate, what kinds of outcomes are we looking for, and how do we invest in infrastructures that support strong learning ecosystems. And I think you guys are at the point soon of being able to provide some really new and evidence-based answers to that. So I'm looking forward to how all that goes. And in Philadelphia, we have studied an ecosystem. We've studied ecosystems in several places, but the work in Philadelphia you referred to was a project that was funded by a private foundation who was interested in helping to address the problem that a lot of kids in the Philadelphia public schools are not reading at a 4th grade level by the time they get to 4th grade. So the whole town got excited about a collective impact effort where many kinds of nonprofits and schools and government agencies would be brought together to try to address this issue in reading. And what the foundation funded was a network of partnerships between informal learning organizations such as libraries, museums, nature centers, and community-based organizations that were already deep in the various immigrant communities in Philadelphia or geographically based communities, neighborhood groups, for instance. And in that work, what we studied was how it was that that network kind of found its niche in the broader collective impact effort in Philadelphia. So what does it mean if a museum or a library gets really serious about helping kids develop literacy skills? And the decision was we would, because we were informal learning organizations, focus on families. We were really interested in family programming that supported literacy activities for parents and children. And so all around the city, these programs popped up, and they popped up most often in community settings because the community-based organizations, there was a Chinese community center, for instance, that was involved working with the Science Museum in Philadelphia. And they would run the programming in the Chinese after-school club, and then they would invite the families to come to the museum for special nights. And the idea of all of that was that families would now have a place in the city that they could point to and say, oh, here's some people who know about my community, who care about my community, and I can keep accessing these resources with my child. And in the course of doing that, there was a lot of literacy programming, literacy materials. Families went home with books. Families were always given food. Often dinners were part of it because they were community events. And what we realized was this was great. Kids were being exposed to literacy. Parents were learning about literacy. And, we have survey findings and observational findings to point to that. But the really big shift, the really big change was that the museums, the libraries, and the nature centers began learning how to do this kind of work with community. They kind of shifted the way they thought about the people they were serving from audiences or patrons into really people who could co-design, co-develop, and collaborate on this program. So they learned, the museums and libraries learned to listen, they learned to notice, and they were really on a first name basis with the families that they worked. It's deeply relational work. If you do this work as a service and you're just kind of ticking the boxes, people might learn something, but they're not going to learn much. You're a library, you're a museum, it's a few hours. But if you develop relationships with that community and you're open to changing your work to support what they need, then you've really shifted how the ecosystem is connected in Philadelphia. And that we saw strong evidence of that, and we were really pleased.
So that does it mean, because I'm always have this feeling, if you look at these networks and these learning ecosystems, that it's on two levels. It's on the level of the person on equity together with a co-designing, co-creation with the children, the adults that you're working with. On the other hand, it's the equity with your partners. So the only thing you can do is, if you do this as a library and a museum and a neighborhood community center together, it means that you are equal and equitable, is that a word? And that you do this together with also the people that you try to reach.
Ecosystems like natural ecosystems, learning ecosystems can be more healthy, they can be more resilient, or they can be less healthy and less resilient. And we tend to think about equity and access as the markers of healthy learning ecosystems, because people are empowered to pursue their interests, to bring their communities and themselves into learning situations. And in our work, we've, there's often a tension between kind of how do you know if it's working? And in the museum world, as you know, and the library world, as you also know, sometimes we can focus on metrics that are about the individual experience. In this work, you can still measure how kids and parents learn, but what we find more predictive of sustainability and of deep work is the extent to which educators, the people doing the work with families, are learning themselves. And so we often talk about the educators as the keystone species in the ecosystem. And if you create a learning ecosystem where educators are supported, where they're challenged, where they are learning and growing, and importantly, getting to know each other in a network, then you really have created an infrastructure that even if your agenda changes or there's massive disruptions. I mean, here, I think, as you guys know, in America, there are massive disruptions right now to the out of school learning ecosystem. And a lot of museums, libraries, community groups are struggling now with funding and with staff in a way they never did. Even if a program closes, there's still this resilient set of relationships that could fill in the gap and respond to support families' needs. Even if a person, an educator, moves from your library to another organization across town, the city hasn't lost that person. You still have someone who knows what's going on, knows how to do this work, that is infused throughout the ecosystem. So I think it changes how we invest in out of school learning, and it changes what we value when we do our work. And we have to do our work in a way that strengthens the educators, in a way that deepens relationships with communities, and in a way that recognizes the unique affordances of places like libraries in bringing people together. Ecosystems can be complex. It's hard to read them sometimes. And definitely, if you're not already in the center of it, it's hard to find your way as a learner. So the idea that there are adults out there who could act as brokers and kind of point to the next program or the next step is really important. And you're right, that could be teachers, it could be educators, librarians, parents. There need to be adults around who notice what kids are interested in and can help them find their way. And that's, sometimes people say, oh, well, we'll just figure out how to do this and replicate it everywhere. And that's really wrong to think about it that way, because it is deeply local, because it's these adults in this place with these concerns and resources that we have that define what's interesting in the ecosystem. So they have to be built from within, and there has to be kind of an anchor or a group of people who are committed to doing that connectivity. And I think libraries and museums are wonderful community spaces to be that anchor, because they can organize all of those adults to help see what the opportunities are.
Yeah. And it's very true what you say about this local context. It's something that we talked a lot about when writing the chapter on lifelong learning, because you have libraries that are in a big city, you have libraries that are in middle big cities or little large cities, but you also have libraries with like 89 small villages within their working area. So that, and everything is different. So the question is, what's the common demeanor that you take away for the learning ecosystem?
So I think the different sizes and different scales and different kinds of work in like an urban versus a rural environment is absolutely part of how you think about designing that ecosystem. In a city like Philadelphia, there are many immigrant communities, and they don't necessarily interact with each other as, like the people who are born in Philadelphia and the people who immigrated to Philadelphia. There's different ways to think about family, different ways to think about engagement. So you really do need to be, as you build an ecosystem, very aware of the needs and the lives and the communities that you're working with. And so I think the thing that ties it together is if you take on the responsibility for helping organize an ecosystem, it's relational work. You're always listening, always noticing, always connecting things together. And a lot of what you do might fail. It's a real challenge in the out of school learning world. We know collaboration is really important. Collaboration is really hard. And it's inefficient because you could just do the program and get it done, or you could be working with people and putting together a program. And that's where the learning occurs, where you struggle to bring work together. And so it's really important in this work, whatever scale you're doing it or wherever you're located, to remember you have to make time for reflection, for building relationships, and for trying out new things, because that kind of experimentation is how new connections form in the ecosystem. So I'd say that's the thing that ties it together, I guess. I mean, I like your question. I don't think I've thought about it much before. The thing that ties it together is taking on a stance of learning and a stance of kind of long-term change. We're going to learn about each other, learn about how the system works, and we're thinking about creating an ecosystem that for 5 years, for 10 years, will be able to adapt to changes. We're not thinking about locking down a system and moving children through it as efficiently as possible. That's why we have schools.
Exactly. And actually what I hear back is it's all also about trust. So you build trust with the communities, you build trust with your collaborators. And one of the examples that you gave in your presentation really, I think, hit a lot of people. And that was the example that you gave that when COVID hit, that actually the communities remained. Can you tell a little bit about this? Because I thought it was very inspirational.
Sure. Yeah. So we were working pre-March 2020 in Philadelphia, and there were programs up and running, and things seemed pretty good. Families were showing up. And then there was the lockdowns in March 2020, and all of the in-person programming stopped for quite a long time. And the challenge that this network faced was how are we going to respond in terms of, do we want to keep the programming going? Is the program going to have to change? Can we do all this work over Zoom? So we initially, as a network, started just thinking about, I guess in every part of our lives back then, we just thought about how can we keep doing the same thing that we did before, but now do it over Zoom, right? But eventually they realized, and this was because they had built trust with the families and the community-based organizations, they realized that what families needed, because they were already doing Zoom school all day long, was maybe not more programming as much as maybe they needed access to food. Maybe they needed access to art supplies or other kinds of things that kids could do activities at home. And a lot of the partnerships shifted pretty quickly to serving the families. I mean, so you had museum employees driving food around to all the families they worked with, or dropping off big kits of art supplies at their house. And then, yes, they also got together on Zoom and they did some programming there. And that was actually, in some ways, quite powerful, because the computers were sitting right there in the living room and the kid might be there doing it. And you see all these people walking behind them. Mom might be back there making dinner. And you were literally right there sharing someone's life with them. It was inspirational. Not all the projects were able to make that pivot. We noticed the ones that made that pivot and had the highest levels of trust and the highest levels of commitment to supporting those families were the ones that had really put the time in to the collaboration and learning about each other's work. So the community-based organization and the art museum, for instance, really took seriously the notion that we were going to find a third way of working that brought together what we both do. And so that part of it, where they were for the families now, as opposed to doing outreach as part of their organizations, was a really strong marker of trust. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. So that's so to slowly wrap it up. If you talk about learning ecosystems, I notice that one way it sounds abstract. It sounds something, but if you discuss it, and like we're now doing, it's about building trust between collaborators. It's like building trust and commitment and connection to communities, and then trying to create learning paths in which people can remain connected and develop themselves. So maybe to try to wrap it up. So look back at what we talked about, maybe you have some key points that you can share with us.
Sure. So my three top tips are um, that it's primarily about the interests. It's about the interest of the people who come and find you and want to work with you. And for that reason, we aren't just putting out programs that we're interested in, but we're creating diverse opportunities for people to join the ecosystem. And so when we think about a new program or a new kind of work we might do, as professionals who work in these organizations, it has to come from um, a rationale about we got a bunch of kids who are interested in this. We're going to help them take the next step and move them along to a set of experiences further down the pathway so that they can develop this lifelong learning. So the outcomes and the design is always with an eye towards this longer set of learning trajectories that participants are going through. It's very participant centered. The other thing is, I think we've talked a lot about collaboration, and it's super clear in a learning ecosystem framework, you cannot do this work by yourself. Even if you have the most amazing set of programs, and even if you have them for young kids and all the way through older kids, people have to get out and bang around the community. They have to meet other organizations. They have to connect with other people. So we have to think collectively. And it's hard, Yuri, because it's competitive, right? And if someone's going to your program, they're not coming to my program. If you get funding, maybe I won't have as much funding. So we're used to competing, I think. And what we really need to do is get more used to collaborating and recognizing that certain common pieces of infrastructure are all of our responsibility to figure out how to fund and how to maintain. And I think the third bit about ecosystems, and it gets to your point about equity, is that it's really easy. And I'll get back to how I started this conversation today. It's really easy when you talk to decision makers, stakeholders, politicians, parents, anybody, for problems of learning and education to just always come back to school. And schools are really important, and they do what they do well. But if we allow how we think about learning and how we think about engagement to only be in service of how school defines it, we leave so many people outside of the work we do. And when you think about school-age children, schools are already failing. They're already disengaged. And if we think about the out-of-school time, all of that deep blue that's outside of the line where people work, as something that has to make sense in terms of school, we've lost all of those people who already aren't connecting at school. So for things to be equitable, for things to change, for things to be responsive and resilient in the face of disruption, they need to be diverse. I mean, we know that from biology, and that diversity is in the experiences we offer, the kinds of communities that we build. And then it makes sense to have libraries, community-based organizations, sports clubs, all of these people involved, because they all have ways of reaching people and bringing them together. So from a regional perspective, if we see all of that activity and all of that learning and ask ourselves, great, how do we take it to the next level, bring it together, connect it, and develop a way of talking about learning that doesn't just equate to how well people do in school, but it's really how connected are they in life? How happy are they? I mean, joy is a word that I think about a lot when I think about informal learning. How much access to opportunity do people have? And then I guess in this conversation, we might not talk too much about it, but you brought up earlier, I mean, there are a lot of people who don't go to school. I was talking about diversity of opportunities so that all sorts of people can join. And I was also talking about a diversity of outcomes. It's important in out-of-school learning, because it's free choice, that people have joy, that they are wanting to join, that they are getting excited about things. And that kind of Energy throughout the ecosystem is a really it's an indicator of a healthy ecosystem where people feel invited to engage. They feel like they belong here in this community, and there are adults who care about them, there are institutions that care about them, and they know how to be empowered learners. There's also older adults, adults who are learning, who need to learn. And so we've done other work on climate change education in rural areas. There's a lot that you could do around health and wellness with adults, as well as, careers and technical training. All of that also requires a strong learning ecosystem. So the lifelong, we should take that seriously and not just define learning as something that we do for kids.
It's nice that you end up with adults, because that was something that I wanted to mention. As a library, we are already working on literacy, digital literacy, on mathematics skills, or at least numbers, etc. That's something that we work on as well. And I think, but that's maybe for another conversation, that the same applies for that. It's the same way. We try to create an ecosystem approach. Usually we are very active in that as library, and we want people to have fun to learn, because it's not obligatory. They are coming because they want to develop themselves and try to find what they want to develop themselves. And that's actually exactly the same approach about everything you're saying. It's about joy, it's about trust, it's about equity, it's about listening. So although we have discussed mainly about out of school and school-aged children, I think this adapts for all the work that we're doing as a library, and an ecosystem that you can apply this for different age groups, because it's out of school. So really, people are joining because they want to.
Yes. Yeah. And when you think about ecosystem work and a family shows up, there's often grandparents there, there's younger siblings there. So you've already got a head start when you do your work from an ecosystem perspective, in a community engaged perspective. You're already part of that community. You're showing up, and you could build on those relationships with the older adults as well.
Yeah. So, well, let's wrap it up. Thank you very much. I think everything about community, joy, trust is something that I hope deeply resonates with people listening. At least it resonates a lot with me. It was really a joy talking to you. Maybe there will be a follow-up. You never know. We'll visit you. You visit us. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Thank you. Great. And talk to you soon.
Thank you, Yuri, and good luck with your important work.